Can you tell us what your upbringing was like and how that shaped you?
I don't know if we have quite enough time for that in this particular interview, but I think that, one of the biggest things to kind of wrap it up, because if you had asked 20-year-old Jessica what her childhood was like to compare to 30-year-old Jessica, the answers would be much different. But yes, I suffered a very violent, a very traumatic and turmoil. I don't know if there's so many words you could use to describe it as a child, but one of the heaviest things that, had happened was physical abuse that I do think that led me to where I am in my career and the career decision that I make. I think everybody, when we think of abuse, we kind of just, anytime we say that, we're not really sure of exactly what it is. And I think I'm a prime example of that. The type of abuse that I had was much more physical in the sense of disciplinary than it was, sexual or emotional. I mean, at times it was very emotional, but I think that kind of came with some of the physical stuff that had happened. But I can also contribute a lot of those things that happened to me, molded me into the person that I am today. So, again, asking 20-year-old Jessica those same questions compared to now, I don't know that I would change some of those things. Or maybe that I almost would back then at 20-year-old Jessica, would have said, I would have done everything different. But, again, 30-year-old me says that I'm really thankful for them because it really helped me through all of these years till now. And I couldn't say that until this point in my life.
What caused that shift, you think? That shift in your perspective?
Losing 4 UFC fights in a row, realizing that, the one thing that you strived around, violence, being not only someone who does it in a calculated way, but also being from it, that I had to realize that, there were other things to life, and that if fighting wasn't all that I had, if physical contact wasn't all that I had, who else would I be? But also the death of my father, there's a lot that goes along with death. So when he passed away, the guy that read his eulogy at the funeral said, those who bear the shackles from the past to the future carry the burden into the future. So it's something that really, 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 really resonated with me. It was something that I really felt like, how do you get past those kinds of things? And if your, assailant dies or something, along that, a mom, dad, or friend or whoever had been kind of hurting you in that way dies, at what point do you let some of those bad parts of it, not the residue it left, not the good things that it left, that you let all the bad memories and you let those things kind of go.
Yeah, I think such a big part of everybody's hero's journey is those darknesses and figuring out how to turn them into, light, and turn them into the way that molds you into being the best human you can be while you're here. And I've read your ESPN article and your other articles and podcasts that you've been on and heard your story, so many different angles. And I think it's as much as you probably feel like I feel when I'm talking about whatever, pieces of my story that I would call my darkest places. You almost feel like at a point you don't want to continue speaking them into existence because it's like, okay, I'm ready to leave that behind me. But I think that so many people, especially our followers, they reach out and go, thank you so much for sharing your story, because it has become, an example of how you can turn the darkness into light. And so I think that that's a big part of what your story is doing for other people and the way you're being of service, in this world.
I think it's even because, one of the biggest things I feel like through the years of making mistakes, and even some of those things having to do with my family and having to do with that like I'm unapologetically myself, but also even through all the stages of my growth, right? Like you don't just go from, the darkness to the light. There's lots of stages. There's grays, there's off-whites, there's so many colors. And I'm learning all the colors of it. And I'm learning that about myself too, and I'm learning those kinds of things. And each win that I put away and put, in the win column allows me to see things a little bit more clearly, but also, allows me to make sure I project my message as well as, be a good example to those who can be that. I think one of the biggest things I try to lead by example in most possible ways that I can, or at least try not to be a hypocrite.
Yeah, that's tough sometimes, I know.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that for our listeners, and I don't know if you've listened to the show before, but a large part of the show is getting the guests we have on's journey laid out so that it's really clear how they became great, you know, how they overcame whatever their obstacles were. So is there any parts of your story that stick out to you that like you remember that was a turning point for you, or a moment where you were like, okay, I got to get through this and take this on and become something more, or I'll just lay down and die at this point?
So physical abuse was something my father dealt with as a child. He was the youngest of 6 children. His father was a war veteran, and we grew up in the Midwest. So my dad was a countryman. You know, he was rough, and you know, being a boy was super important to him. So things for him were always just a tad bit more aggressive. You know, I didn't grow up with girls in that regard. So for me, it was always about keeping up with the guys, right? So it's always like, all right, you got to be as good as the guys if you want to go. If not, I'm going to be stuck behind. And I didn't have any girlfriends to stay back with, or a mom. So it was like, you know, I'd much rather be with the guys. So I learned at a young age to keep up with the guys at a very young age. It happened to be athletics that really stuck to it. So at a young age, I started doing sports up in, you know, 5th grade, when I started playing basketball. And basketball was my first official sport that I ever, like, team sport, so to speak, that I actually played. That wasn't like a park and rec thing. And basketball, that's when I knew just sports in general was mine and my dad's biggest connection between the two of us. So we lived in Cuyahoga Falls, which was a suburb of Ohio. We decided to move to a place called Ritztown. Ritztown's a little country town in Ohio. I mean, my graduating class from there was only 100. So it was very,
Wow.
very small. It was a township, so it wasn't even a true city. So we moved there in early 99, and my dad was divorcing his second wife. So my mom and my dad, you know, from the age of 1 to like 2.5, I don't really remember much of them. There's little glimpses and times of it, but the biggest thing was my mother shot my father in the chest because he was very abusive. So my dad was able to gain custody of me and my brother at a very young age. So my dad was very involved in everything I did, and very involved in both of us, but which brought him to his second wife, a woman by the name of Roxanne. So we had all, our parents had decided it's time to move. It's time to get out of the city. We're going to the country. And they were having problems. They were trying to save their marriage. And, you know, I was still being a kid, you know, at that point, 5th, 6th grade. So, you know, at that point, you know, like you're still getting understanding of being a teenager and of life and boys and fun little like dance clubs, and social media was just starting to get cool then. So my dad there with his second wife, it didn't work out with him. And I'll explain to you why. So there was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of just not agreeing on how to raise kids. So at that time, you know, being in 5th grade and, you know, being ready to like be a young girl and, you know, finally, you know, embrace that side of my life. My dad had a divorce from his second wife, and that was like, he kind of wasn't as present as much. There was a lot more to it, but he wasn't as present as much. But he had just most recently started dating another woman who happened to be a exotic dancer. So he started to let me do a little bit more things and let me kind of go out and paid a little less attention. So at that point, I go, hey, can I go to the dance club? And I was able to go to the dance club. He gave me the $20 for it. He said, go ahead, go and have fun with your friends. And he happened to be at home that night. And can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I happened to go home. Well, he gave me the $20 to go that night. And somehow in some other way, my dad forgot that he had told me where I was. And my friend's mom had actually called and said, hey, are the girls there? And we had lied about who we had gotten a ride with, but we were where we said we were. Right. We hadn't been drinking. We were, which, you know, where the dance club was to my actual residence was about 10 houses. So it wasn't like we were far from my house. No, it was literally right there.
Yeah.
But my dad was irate, and probably irate because of things that he knew that he had seen that happen to women, as well as things that he knew was just out there. So my dad showed up at the dance club and just all hell broke loose. And that was the article that most people have seen recently that I decided to share in true detail, when my dad had actually beat me up. And that's when he was charged with misdemeanor of the highest level. And I was actually taken from him for some time. But that was the biggest moment in my life that kind of changed things. It wasn't until we suffered the car accident together that it really, really, really made things even more, just it made the turmoil bigger between him and I. And I don't even know if it was a matter of anything I ever did. I think I was really set up for failure as a young girl. I think my dad's just a very hurt man. And I think that my mom and him not working out, me looking so much like her and sounding like her, at times he would just treat me like, you know, their relationship. And I think that was some of the things that, and not to mention, he couldn't, a really hard time with women. You know, he wasn't the sweetest man in the world. He was a very good provider, but he wasn't a ladies' man.
Yeah. I said before you got on, I was talking on the show about how the very first time I saw you, I still remember it because you just kept saying over and over, I'm just so happy to be here. I'm just so grateful to be here at the press conference. And you were just like, you were radiating joy and gratitude. And so like Mercedes was saying about how your story reminds people that like, oh, well, she got through it. I can get through it too. And sometimes I know we are smiling through pain, but the fact that you radiate gratitude and such positivity, I think also that's so impactful for people, especially after hearing your story, that like, oh, I can still have a positive mindset and I can still like do things that make me feel that excited, you know? So
it takes time. And I think that's the thing is that I really try to preach to everyone is like, I know it's a lot, but you can, and every day is a little bit better if you let it, you know. Darkness can only be dark if you don't let the light in. So that's also up to you, you know, and I knew I needed to heal, and I didn't like the way that I felt at times, and I didn't like that I seen that some of the things that bled through in my childhood upbringing that started bleeding into my adult upbringing, and I wanted child Jessica to heal adult Jessica, and thought that was a really big thing. So it's something I wouldn't say I struggle with daily, but that we all cope with daily, and I think it's forever evolving. You know, you have to work on always.
What did you do in order to find purpose in it and make it a positive piece of your story?
I think it took years because a lot of people, I mean, it's, you know, I've been in the MMA industry for, 14 years. Not very many people have known this. And one of the biggest things is I didn't want everybody, at first I was like, all right, people are just going to look at me like, all right, this is just a pretty girl. She's had everything made in her life for her, which is far from it, because everything has been extremely hard and I've earned it all by hard work. But that was one of the biggest things, is I wanted people to see me for face value. I wanted them to see me for me and see me for Jessica, that I wouldn't come out and tell my story. And granted, times have changed. We're in a time change where people want to hear your story and want to embrace it. But there was a time when people didn't want to hear it. If you would have told them, they would have called you a crybaby, or they would have, you were being this or you were being that. And I just, we're in a different time that, it was time to share more. And it was in the beginning years of women's mixed martial arts to talk about, my dad beat me and all these things. Like, you know what the guy talk would have been like at the gym behind my back? They would have been oh, chick's got daddy issues. She's just fishing for a dude and all these things. I would have never been given the chance to be seen for a full value of myself. And that's forever why I still, I rarely share it with, on a very high level. It's going to be shared on a level where it's truly appreciated and appreciated me. So there was I don't know, it might have been after I beat Zoila in Bellator that I knew that people actually really believed me now, I think that's like, and that was like when, like Bjorn was going to do all these things with the women's division and like do all these things. And like Rhonda was in, UFC and, are in Strike Force. I'm like, dude, this is the time, like this time. And I think I actually did an interview that time because my dad showed up at that fight last minute, actually, because we were going through a moment, and there's like other stories, but they're for other times. But, abuse didn't stop until my dad died is what, most people really truly need to understand, like, and physical levels and emotional levels. But he showed up at that last minute. And that's when I knew that was the time. I knew that that's when people were going to be looking at me, that people actually cared about, and my word had value because he said I was going to do it.
Yeah. We had a woman a psychologist on by the name of Sky who talks about women especially, but generally people having what she calls a worthiness wound, which is this idea, like kind of what you're speaking to here about our story, almost us not being worthy of even speaking our truth because we feel like it's not going to be accepted because for some reason we're not good enough, or it's not enough, or it's not, I don't even know. It could be, we feel like it's not interesting enough, or just not worthy of other people's acceptance. But it is really cool to see that times are changing, you know, and that's kind of the world, obviously, Jade and I live in, is hoping to make that change move along a little quicker. But I was wondering too, if it wasn't, you know, for you, it wasn't maybe going to a psychologist or a therapist. I don't know if that was any part of it for you, but I know you did step into a gym and, you know, you got into MMA, and that was a big part of, I'm sure, your journey to healing as well. So maybe you can speak to how MMA has made you stronger emotionally.
One of the things that my dad did to us as kids was he made me do teach me how to self-reflect a lot, is handling my own problems, handling myself. I am my best critic. I am my worst critic. I am everything. So one of the things that took, you know, the hardest for me it was to talk, right? So going to a counselor, going to someone like that, I knew that wasn't going to ever help me. It wasn't going to ever help me get my outlet, right? It wasn't going to help me evolve and get all this out. That when me and my father had gotten in a fight when I left home, and when he kicked me out, and I happened to find Strong Style and find those guys, it felt like a healthy outlet. It just felt like I enjoyed, and even as bad as that sounds, I enjoyed what I made others feel about me, what was once felt to me. And I felt like instead of doing it maliciously and, you know, being somebody who hurt others or did it, I found that there was a market for it, and there was a market for me to make money off of something that was such a bad experience for me, that could be for others, that sometimes, like, you know, physically was the only way I knew how to express myself, you know, and it, without learning how to do all that physical exhaustion, it wasn't until about midway through my career that physical exhaustion taught me how to be a better emotionally, you know, and handle things that way. Because when you're so physically exhausted, you can't move and fight it, you find other ways, right? Like, because you're like, I can't be physically exhausted and feel emotionally exhausted and feel those things. So there was a good outlet and a good way for me to learn how to do that. But you know, a lot of it was self-care and it was all me, you know what I mean, that way. And it was me doing it, but it was a group of people around me that really influenced me. You know, Strong Style Fight Team was a huge influence in my life, you know what I mean? Like, the guys that I was around were a really good group of guys at the time, you know what I mean? Like, they really did everything they could there to, you know, help me be a lady and just be genuine in this sport, right? Like, so that was something that really helped. I mean, because I needed that, you know what I mean? Like, whereas, like, I had seen women treated multiple ways. I've seen women, you know, women that didn't respect themselves, that I didn't want to be like, that were with my dad and his friends. And, you know, I kind of looked at the example of what I didn't want and used that as what I didn't, you know, what I didn't want to be. So if I'd seen it and I didn't like it, I was like, well, that's not what I want.
Yeah, a good support group is killer.
Yeah. I know also what came to mind for me when you were telling a bit of your story is, like, I always feel like I've forgiven my parents, and then I realized through a toxic partner choice or through some depression that hits, that, like, my inner child is still seeking healing, and that there's just so much more to be done. I'm curious what tools you've used to aid in your healing and in your forgiveness.
The way that I would say it is that, are you sure that's just not a trigger for you, and that it's not the inner child? Maybe she's healed. Maybe you're just looking at pictures, you know, and those are things like that, right? Like, so when I lost fights and things like that, when you look to blame, you know, or when I'm having a moment, I look to blame. I try to ask myself, you know, before I blame it on, you know, my parents, something like that. Is this just a trigger that's making me feel this way, right? Do I really feel like these emotions? And sometimes I give myself a chance to not initially react, but to, you know, think about it, especially when it comes to those kinds of things. Like when it comes to big relationships and things that, you know, are super important, right? Like if you want to tell someone to kick rocks on the internet, tell them to kick rocks. You don't have to think about that. But when it comes down to, like, you and your boyfriend having a huge fight and he's just having a bad day, and maybe you're having a bad day, but you're kind of channeling things or triggering things that, or maybe he did something that triggered something in you, and then you start treating him different, and then you go, well, you know, this is just how I am because of how I grew up. At what point do we no longer become, we no longer that person who we are when we grew up, but we are who we are from the circumstances we're surrounded by now? Because if we look at what you're reflecting now, is it what you're reflecting now that you don't like and that isn't good? Or is it that maybe you're just not healed as much as you think you are, you know?
Yeah.
digging down to the truth is
when you make it about you and
mm-hmm.
you and not compared to empathy and being
mm-hmm.
able to say, I can relate without telling your story. I think that's something, without, like in a situation where you're conversing of it. But if you see a 12-year-old girl and she's been, abused in that way, maybe the first initial thing is not to, maybe it's to treat them first,
mm-hmm.
allow them, and then share with them, and maybe you have to just look at things that way. That's what I do. That's mine. That's mine. I try to figure out when I'm getting triggers or when things are really unfair.
Right. Yeah. That's hard. Basically coming up against cognitive dissonances and going like, is this going to be where I decide that this is actually just a story I've been telling myself, a big lie I've been telling myself that's not serving me anymore, and then accept this new truth and change with it? Or
that's
I'm going to keep.
We were saying. That's the one thing. And it's just like kind of like just a little bit more of a breakdown of it, and I'm still learning it. Like, listen, I am terrible in relationships, so I'm still
not easy. I don't think it ever gets easier. I think it just is like a new layer. That's it. It's not easier. So we see fighters go through, let's call them exploratory times in their career where they might be opening new doors in their minds. Sometimes we see that come through newfound religion or sudden breakdown, aka awakening, what I like to call them. And we often see that happen through plant medicine with a lot of fighters we talked about on this show specifically. But in these instances, sometimes a fighter will decide to step back from fighting because he or she no longer feels like aligned with the reasons they were previously fighting for. So I'm wondering if you ever felt a wane in your passion or in the direction your career was taking you. And if so, how do you move through something like that and reframe it so you can still make it work?
The first 3 years of my UFC career were absolute hell.
Okay.
The first 3 years, I feel like I'm on the swing now. Like I'm on the upswing of it. Like I started out really bad, and now this is when it gets good. My first fight, was overturned for marijuana. Then I lost 4. I lost 1, and then won 1, and then lost 4 straight, almost got cut during that time. And that's when also I had some really traumatic things happen to me. My dad hit me as an adult and put his hands on me. And then following doing that, he came down with terminal brain cancer and died. So it was like 3 years of like, oh my goodness. So there was an 18-month layoff in between there for a shoulder injuries between the Alexis Davis and the Leslie Smith fight. And that was like one of the, like, I'd have to say like during that whole time, like in that whole midst of it, like that, especially, it was 18 months after the Leslie Smith fight that I thought that, like things were going to kind of be better. And then when they still weren't, and it wasn't until I got the call from Dana that they were starting a flyweight division that I kind of knew where my journey, this was just a part of my journey, between getting cut from Bellator, not because I wanted to or because I wasn't adequate, they cut their women's division. And in that time, it was when my career needed most. So there was a lot of experimental times there, going up a weight class, learning that I'm not that big of a girl. Just there was a lot then, as well as about myself, about UFC, about the difference of between at that time, Bellator is amazing now, but at the time, the difference between, Bellator and the UFC was light years.
Yeah.
And learning all that. And then, to kind of top it off with my dad dying and then turning around and finally getting my return to the 125 division. And, here we are 4-1 in the division, as one of the best. I'd have to say there's gotta be some silver lining, right?
Yeah.
You gotta laugh a little bit at it and just, and look back and go, those are, during all those times, moments like this is what kept me strong, is just the future. And I would think about the future being so incredible that I had kept my expectations high for myself. That's what works for me, keeping my expectations high for myself.
Yeah. And I might say, just because of what Jade was talking about earlier, and something we recognized in you early on, is your ability to have gratitude and take a moment to, like, we call it like a sacred pause, like take a moment to think about, what am I grateful for in this situation? Instead of, well, I wish I was doing this, or comparing it to this and that, and, always hoping for something more and something more. Of course, we have that part of us that drives us forward and motivates us forward, but being grateful is like what makes the human experience right now, like when you're actually living it, enjoyable.
Well, everybody's so on to the next thing, you know what I mean? So I think that society, because we've created these blue check marks and these things that people think that they have to rush so much to get into the next moment that they forget how the reason blue check marks became, and these people that they admire, how they got to that was by doing the same thing over and over, even if it seemed redundant or if it got really hard or seemed completely endless. That, I mean, it's the only way that it truly generally happens, and you can truly be grateful for it. Because like moments like, you know, my last fight, getting to be here in Las Vegas after the title fight and losing, you know, like I got to fight here at home, and I got to come home and all of my friends were at my house when I got home. You know what I mean? Like we got to leave. I got to leave and watch the main event from my TV right here in the house. Like that was, I was so grateful for knowing of the fact that I had that. Like that to me is if you have good gratitude, you know, if you're grateful, you'll be able to have those things always.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to always just be able to teach that too, because it's not easily taught.
Yeah, gratitude breeds abundance for sure.
Yeah,
I like
that's
that.
it. Yeah.
So we always have a question from the Magic Mob for every guest, and Scruffy_1112. He said, thoughts on women's MMA. What are your thoughts on women in MMA having to be sexual in order to get noticed by media and sponsors, and in some cases getting fights? Do you even agree with that? Or
you know, I think that we all as women, right? Like, you know, we all are who we are, right? And sometimes who we are, like in that way, it's like, okay, if you like to dye your hair, and the way that you promote your hair is dyeing it and doing and showing all these things, that's how you are, and that's what makes you comfortable. I think that some of the women do it because they're comfortable. I maybe some of them do it because of that aspect of like the sexual part of it. I have managed to make great dues, and my pictures out there of me and sexuality, like I show sexuality in a different way. I was raised by men. I keep myself covered unless it's truly worth it, you know, in that way. So that's just like, I think you have to look at the machine, right? If you're going to look at a girl like Rachel Ostrovic, like she's got big boobs, I wouldn't want to look at them. You know what I mean? Like in that way. So like she's marketing what she's good at, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That might be something that she's, you know, good at. And if that happens to fit to one market, that fits to one market. I don't think that we're in a position anymore where girls are just getting girls for fights, because we're seeing girls like Amanda Nunes and, you know, people like Valentina who, you know, they're not out there just, you know, taking their clothes off to get these fights, you know what I mean, so to speak. I think again, it's going back to what people think that is getting us the fights. It's actually our abilities that are getting it, but because we live again in such a visually satisfying world, it's hard not to look at it that way. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that sometimes these people think that it was like that. Maybe it was at the beginning, but it's changed now. That I don't think that's true, because, you know, like I've been able to get a lot of jobs based upon things. I've had jobs where, you know, they're like, hey, can you take something off for us? You know, the jobs was like, hey, we got to put stuff on. So, and one of those being Cosmo, when I did a body shaming issue with, you know, and it was about that. And that was one of the things I said is people will like me either for who they are, and they'll either get on or they'll get off. And that's again, like, I think that us as women, you do what you're comfortable with, because nobody on social media is doing anything that they're not comfortable with, because they wouldn't put it out there. And that's one of the biggest things that we always have to, before we judge, is you look at someone's social media and say, oh, she did that for this. Well, if she's comfortable with it, that's her decision. That's how she looks at herself.
Yeah,
So
I like that. I've never thought of it that way. If she's comfortable with it. Yeah.
She's
and I like
I mean, that it has to be now. Social media is too influential. You can't even, like, that's why everybody thinks about it, and they spend so much time doing it. We have to realize that even sometimes when things seem a little crazy, like, they want that. That's what they want.
Yeah. Yeah, I think even though with that in mind, there are a lot of young girls who are being influenced into making maybe poor decisions that they'll regret later, or maybe not, to post something that's maybe sexier than they said they would post, you know, last year, but now they've seen so many sexy photos, or so whatever it is, or they've seen all their friends get likes when they post something sexy and they want that many likes, and it becomes this like contest that takes a comfort. Yeah.
But we're really fortunate that right now social media is in a growth stage. I'm so proud of it. The IG taking away the likes, great, right? For people like us who have blue check marks, we have analytics. We can send it to show people, like, all right, you want to know our analytics? I'll send them to you. Don't worry, you can see them. But for the sense of the young social medias and the young influence of what it does to young girls, that being taken away was one of the biggest, you know, a great way to show influence. Because now if if you can't see of all the people who liked it, you look just for the one person you want to like it.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
you're not going to be looking for all these people, but you know, if you're looking for that one, no bananas.
Yeah.
But I think that that's one of them. The second one was like the what the other people are liking on IG. Also, I think that's another one that's a really good to take away. Obviously, it's not good for people to have that kind of access to what the other people are doing, but it also can start fights with people. I saw you like this person's post, right? Like, so again, I think social media is starting to change. So like you're saying, yes, we went through a very early developmental stage where people were just doing that. Girls were fearing influence. But again, we're seeing that, you know, like we have to make a change, and we're seeing it, you know what I mean? We're seeing it on Instagram, which is so visually driven, that we're starting to see those kinds of things where you don't get to know that and you don't get to make that choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think we're social media is finally, you know, it's kind of went through its feel out stage. You know what I mean? It went through its 90s stage. So it's their turn to finally, you know, embrace some of the good changes and see it. I think that we're going to see a lot better presence on social media for kids about, hey, saying, well, this person had this many likes. You know what I mean? Like it's really going to make comparability more based upon what it actually is. Well, she's got brown hair and I got blue hair. You know what I mean? Let's really do it base for base. You know what I mean? Well, she's tall, I'm short. You know, like we can give it for true value, not like, oh, well, she gets this many likes, she gets that many likes. Like let's judge it based upon judgeable values.
Yeah. I like that positivity.
I hope that we go that direction. I haven't seen Instagram roll that like anti-like thing out yet, which I hope they do, but I have a feeling it's.
So they must on some of them, because it's on some of mine. My dog, like my dog's.
It's in certain countries.
I would say like if you look at my dog's Instagram, it'll do that. Like even on mine now, just recently, it just turned over where it like I can only tell likes. It just says well, it'll say like.
So they're rolling it
like
out.
This picture and others. You know what I mean? So I think that they are, because mine at first was not.
I know all of Australia's is like that.
Yeah.
So
mine currently is, as well as like my dogs.
They're testing it on pets.
Yeah.
Exactly. They did it on the whole pet thing.
No, but I do like the idea that we're headed hopefully towards, you know, just bringing some reality to what's really going on out there, instead of it being like it's watching a cartoon show at some point when you're just scrolling through Instagram. Everything's so fake and and it's harmful. But at the same time, you know, okay, you get off of the phone and then there's everything else in the media to compare yourself to, or, you know, the Joneses next door or whatever it is. So it's just a part of the human condition that I think we need to kind of untangle generally as well. Like that we always are trying to compare ourselves to something.
Yeah, I agree.
So we have a few questions we like to ask everyone who comes on the show. First off, if you could hug your younger self right now, what would you say?
I would hug her and I would just tell her it's all going to be all right.
Yeah.
Actually, I would say to her, play, I believe, because that's my tagline. I would just like, I believe, little baby, you're fine. You're okay.
Oh, I love that.
How old were you when you're hugging yourself?
For some reason, 11-year-old me stands out right now.
That's a very popular age for this question. I feel like 11, 12 is like such a transitionary time.
I think it is. I really do. I think that's that age when you're like really coming to your own. It's like middle school time, you know?
Yeah. It's a tough time.
If you could have the whole world read one book, which would it be?
The Secret.
That's very you.
Yeah. The Secret. I think that it could really help change a lot of people's mindset, but as well just teach them exercises. I think a lot of people always go, well, I want to change, but then there's no exercise on how to. Most people are not that creative.
That book gets a lot of flack, but I think it's just the theory of manifesting, or theory of visualization.
I think it's just a good exercise.
Yeah.
It really is. I know that a lot of people like look at it like, oh, there's all these other things that could do. Like, it's just about exercising good mental thoughts, because that's all you got to take from it.
Positivity. Yeah, I like that. If you could whisper one phrase to everyone on the planet, what would it be?
Take care of your body. You only get one.
I like that. I've been saying that a lot this week, actually. Your body and the earth. Those are the two things I've been.
They're all that we have. They're literally like, I'm sure people could dissect it, but look, as far as I'm concerned, I only get one of these physical beings now, so I better take care of her.
Yeah. She's the only reason. Yeah, she's the only reason I get to do this stuff, this cool stuff.
So before we let you go, where can people find you online?
You can find me at everything at Jessica Evil Eye on all social medias. I'm not getting a TikTok though. I'm not doing that. Like, that's too much. You're trying to convince me to do it, but I'm not. Which means that I might end up breaking eventually, but I really don't want another one. I really don't want another one. But
we're trying to struggle against it too.
I don't know what it is. I'm trying to stay ignorant.
Yeah.
Right. Me too.
I've got one. I just don't use it, but we'll look for you there. And now you have to sign up. No, we love following you everywhere else. So
yeah.
Well, let me know, ladies, if there's any way that I can ever help with anything or any future projects. I love talking with you.
Thank you. We appreciate coming on. Thanks for being such a light.
Yeah.
Thanks, ladies.
Bye.
We'll talk soon.
Okay.
What a little ray of sunshine.
I know, it's so weird. Like whenever we actually have a Bellator fighter on, it hits me even more, like
because she was with Bellator. Yeah, I know.
Well, sorry, yeah, she was. So I think of her. I think of Bellator.
Fighter, yes.
Yeah,
she's
I know
the
she's
original.
now, but that was such a there are certain Bellator moments that stand out for me, and she's one of them. So it's moments like that or it's when we have fighters on from Bellator, in a sense that I'm like, man. At that moment, if you would have told me you and I were like still doing this, like still in each other's lives and like doing this, like
I know,
I would have been so happy. I would have been so it's so cool. It gives me gratitude
and excitement for the future, because what does that mean for we could manifest
that's so
even
true.
later?
Like what would someone tell me right now about 5 years from now that I would be so stoked to hear?
Yeah, and that's the goal we set and move towards it. I love it.
Yeah.
Plus,
she rubbed off on me again.
Yeah, you done did it again. I'm gonna change your name from Jessica Evil Eye to Jessica. I don't know. We got to make up a good one. Let's see.
Grateful Heart.
Grateful Heart. Oh, that sounds very Indian. I like it. Go with it.
All right. What do you have for a magic trick, or you want me to go first?
I'll go. My magic trick is to detox personal and mental space. And none of the ways of detoxing that I'm going to tell you here have anything to do with detoxing your physical body. However, they may be just as cleansing or more. I think very cleansing. And all of these are things I'm desperately in need of doing myself, by the way, which is why I wrote this all out so that I could also post it on my fridge. Okay, so number 1, detox your email inbox and unsubscribe to all that cluttered email, that junk email you don't need. Number 2, donate clothing you never wear that I could really use in my extensive closet. And number 3, clean out expired products from your kitchen, bathroom, and cupboards. That one, everybody probably can go through that. It's pretty simple. Number 4, look through your finances and cancel unnecessary monthly subscriptions, which I really need to do. I know I've got some lingering in there. And that goes with like apps on your phone too. If you've subscribed to something and then maybe you didn't even transfer that app to your new phone, but it's just dinging you.
I really want to go through and delete videos and pictures that are just taking up space that I don't need.
I have so many. I think I have like 39,000 videos.
Yeah, I have 24,000.
Good Lord. What are we doing with all that?
I don't know.
Okay. Number 5, organize your phone and delete apps and pictures. So it kind of goes hand in hand with all that we just said. Number 6, clean and organize documents and photos on your computer, which, good Lord, can you imagine how gorgeous this computer I'm looking into right now would be if it was cleaned out? That's like that right there. I could just feel myself get lighter thinking about it.
Yeah. I just need to focus on my closet.
I need all these things so badly. Okay. Number 7, clean and declutter your car, which is cool because that probably rarely happens if you're anything like me. And number 8, last but not least, unfollow people on social media who make you feel like crap. And this last one comes with a caveat because we hear things like that all the time. Oh, unfollow that person if they make you crap, whatever.
I know. I see both sides.
Yeah. I think we can often, like we were talking about with Jessica, find ourselves comparing ourselves to someone else on Instagram and feeling like crap because of that comparison that we're creating. So like she was saying, it's important to remember that the person on Instagram may not be the problem in every case. And it might be that we're creating a comparison to them. So when you're taking on this last detox step, I'd invite you to look deeply inward as you do it and see what comes up. If you find yourself triggered by a photo someone's posting, it could be maybe about animal rights and veganism, could be about being pro-gun laws. It could be a sexy photo someone posts or even an unflattering post that someone puts up. But just take a moment to sit with what comes up for you and decide if it's something that's actually toxic to you, or if you're giving it the power to become toxic to you by creating a story around it. I think if we can get into that practice of using that kind of truth around all the media we consume, detoxing our lives becomes much easier and much more sustainable, which is the key word there.
Yeah.
So with that, my magic today is to clear out and create space for the things that give us joy, remove unnecessary things from our physical space, because I truly do believe that that greatly improves our mental health when we can declutter our space. And they say that your house or your room is a direct reflection of what the inside of your brain looks like.
Oh my God. So the social media one is interesting for me because like the two that I would probably tend to unfollow or like, or tend to be triggered by,
Yeah.
I love seeing other people's perspectives. It's never a mind thing for me. Like if it's someone else's perspective or what their conviction is, never have an issue. But if it's someone who's like living life so big and they just like, they were at the coolest New Year's Eve party and they like rode their bike to Patagonia, it's like they're having these big experiences.
Yeah.
That's when I start to feel like crud about myself, because that's when I'm like, man, I'm not making moments. I'm not making big moments. I'm just stuck in a routine. I'm just in the cycle. And instead of being inspired and being challenged, I just get down on myself. So there's that. And then I know most pictures are face tuned and filtered, but still when I see someone that just, it seems like they're just so put together and they've got great skin and they just have the right curves and all that. That's another time when I feel like crud about myself. And so it's interesting that those are the two things that always come up for me, but I am trying to be inspired by and remind myself it's okay to appreciate other people's beauty without feeling bad about my own, you know? So when you do feel like crud about something, maybe try to switch your thoughts on it, your thought process, because so I wrote this to-do list without knowing it was your magic hour. I wrote it on my January calendar. Magic trick. I wrote it as my January to-do list, the exact thing. So, because I know we both follow that account.
We're in sync.
Yep. Yeah. Too much. So, or not too much, but so I had to think about that because I was like, well, do I want to unfollow them or do I want to choose to be positive and inspired?
Excited by it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause I think that word triggered too can be changed to excited. You know, it's the way we decide to think about things as well. Like you're saying is we can just flip a word and be like, ooh, that excited me. Why did that excite me? You know, and then it can become more positive than negative, you know, and you don't even have to go down such a dark rabbit hole. But in any case, whatever you do, it's about figuring out how to stand in the truth with all that, because that in itself, in every aspect of the word, figuring out truth in every moment will declutter your life on its own accord. So, but I like that little insight. And I was going to say, you know, I know you have a routine. You have these two toddlers who you are raising alone, essentially, and you have a routine that has to be followed in order for your sanity to be intact. And of course, you have to be home because you have these kids. You have to be with them. You know, when I say home, I mean like in Austin, you have to be there a lot of the time. And, you know, for instance, I'm gone all the time with work and I'm traveling a lot and I don't have much but my two cats to tie me to a certain place. So I'm on the road a lot, but a person like me looks at someone with routine and craves that and sees that as like, that looks amazing, you know, or I see the person in a who's always advocating some fitness routine or something like that. And I think, wouldn't that be lovely to just wake up every day and be able to like run on the same beach and
know what to expect.
And just to have that kind of schedule. So I think on every end, no matter what, that's just like I was saying earlier to Jessica, this is part of the human condition for us to always be comparing. So I think if we can figure out how to make it the healthiest possible version of that, we benefit the most from it. So yay, let's do that. What's your magic?
Let's go on. Let's move on. There's too much to say.
We could go on, but that'll be for another show.
So mine is, I don't know if, I feel like you might do this already, but coconut oil pooling. So especially when you're sick. So basically as soon as you wake up, especially it's important that you do it before brushing your teeth, you swish 1 tablespoon of coconut oil, make sure it's organic, unrefined, all that stuff, in your mouth and this is hard, but for 15 minutes. So what I like to do is maybe put it in right before you get in the shower and then just try to do it the whole time you're in the shower. So for 15 minutes and Another tip, because some people, they'll gag because it like something about the taste of it really bothers them. Something you can do is put xylitol or stevia or a lemon essential oil. You can put like little things that like because those xylitol, the reason why I say xylitol is because that's actually good for your teeth. Xylitol is. Yeah. And then lemon essential oil helps with, it's a pathogen, it's an extra pathogen fighting power. So lemon essential oil is. So that's why I recommend those two. But the other important tip is not to spit it in your drain, because coconut oil can actually build up in your drain and cause issues. So always make sure to spit it in the trash, and then brush your teeth, because then you can get all that, feeling out. Yeah. But the benefits are it whitens your teeth. It helps prevent gingivitis and cavities. It kills bacteria that causes bad breath. It reduces inflammation and bleeding gums. It improves metabolism and detoxification. It reduces tooth sensitivity and pain, and it helps clear the sinuses. But because coconut oil is microbial, if you feel like you're about to get sick or you're getting a sore throat, it's one of the best things you can do besides, like oregano oil or something. But yeah, so that's something that I used to be in the habit of doing every day. And I don't know how I got out of the routine, but I forgot about it. I was looking for a magic trick today and it came up. So I'm going to be back on the pool.
Yeah, I got to try it too. And I also think I might do it with a different oil, because of when we had on Sahara Rose, she talks all about Ayurveda and the different oils for different types, depending on what your body is best at using for its benefits. So I know you can do it with a few different types of oil. Maybe sesame is one of those. If it is, I know that's
I thought that was for like being on top of your skin, but the reason why the coconut oil works for all this is because of the actual like benefits of coconut oil. Yeah. And the bile. So yeah, I would definitely look into that though.
I'm going to look into it, but either way, I do want to try it. Chris was doing it for a while. I don't know why he stopped either. I think you just kind of, you forget. What do we do? We got so many things in our damn routine.
I know.
By the way, we installed
a good habit.
We installed a sauna today in my patio. Very excited about it. So now I have a new routine that I'll be adding magic tricks to once I have something that actually works for me. We'll see how the detox process goes.
You're in there with coconut oil in your mouth.
I might be. That might be a morning routine whenever I'm home, the 3 days a month I'm home.
Funny. All right, you guys, thanks for listening. We hope you found this conversation as enlightening and as gratitude invoking as we did. If so, please share it with your friends and family. This would mean so much to us. And remember that you can go to our Instagram page at The Magic Hour to ask us or any of our future guests a question. Talk to you guys next week. Until then, be alive.
Thank you to Jessica. We can say it at the same time. Ready? Thank you.
I'll let you go.
Thank you to Jessica. Sorry, I didn't have a name on it, so I just jumped in it. Thank you to Jessica I for being on the show today, and to @RayToneRoyal for our intro jam, and of course to John Aaron Garza from Real in Motion Productions for producing the show.
Stay magical, friends.